You're not going to be able to protect those airfields indefinitely, but you may be able to do it long enough so that China has an increased doubt that they aren't going to pay a very heavy price for doing that sort of an attack.
It's the Lawfare podcast. I'm Daniel Byman, the foreign policy editor of Lawfare, and I'm here today with Tom Karako, who is the director of the Missile Defense Project at CSIS.
You've seen the Russian kind of proliferation of cruise and hypersonic and, yes, undersea, megaton delivery devices. It's going to be wicked hard to get everything, and that's why I think it is far more stabilizing than destabilizing when you put pen to paper and you think it through.
Today we're talking about the Trump administration's Golden Dome missile defense programs. So we're going to talk today about the changes or possible changes in U.S. missile defense. And I want you to start really by educating us. On January 27th, President Trump issued an executive order entitled An Iron Dome for America. It's since come to be called the Golden Dome effort. And for those of us who are outside the missile defense community, can you give us a description of what Golden Dome is, why it's happening now, the cost and purpose, and just make us smart, please?
Well, look, I think fundamentally, as it kind of said at the outset of the January 27 executive order, this is driven by a particular problem set, a particular threat set, and that is the very considerable proliferation and expansion of missile threat capabilities globally. This, what was once, perhaps seen as a boutique threat, has very much now become weapons of choice. And we've seen this in spades in the Ukraine conflict over the past 3 years. And likewise, we've seen it in the number of very sophisticated air and missile attacks on Israel, for instance, over the past couple of years. And you've also seen a real, I would say, stepping out and a demonstration of the technical prowess of active air and missile defense. Ukraine has put the Patriot air defense system on its currency because of the significance of its to kind of preserving Ukraine's sovereignty to date. Air and missile defense is not going to win a conflict for you by itself, but its absence will lose one for you pretty quick in this environment. One can just imagine what would have happened in terms of, for instance, Israel's response on April 14 of last year when hundreds and hundreds of things were coming in simultaneously. If it had not been for the engagement of so many hundreds of those things, both in the air and with ballistic missile defense, it would almost have certainly meant a massive response by Israel to Iran. And so the executive order kind of recognizes that very significant missile threat and says, hey, we got to do something about this, especially for the homeland. And it's very much attentive to the U.S. homeland, especially, but not only CONUS, continental United States, as opposed to, say, force protection abroad, things like that. And so that's, I think, the fundamental impulse here. The title Iron Dome for America plays off of the executive order. It plays off what is perhaps the best publicly, popularly known missile defense system, the lowest layer of Israel's multi-layered defense. But it's definitely and emphatically not about the Iron Dome product made by Lawfare. It is going to be about a very different threat set and a very different set of capabilities. Some of those things we're going to kind of draw on what's already in existence today. And yes, it's also going to be about new capabilities, new domain basing, things like that. But it'll be a mix, and it's going to have to be a mix because just in the same way that Israel has a multi-layered system, there is a multiplicity of threats, UAVs, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, various things, hypersonic gliders, and the like. And all of those they're threats that are here. They have arrived. And those are things we have to be contended with to provide some degree of protection for the American people, for critical infrastructure, and the like. And so that's kind of the problem set is to deal with. It is a very wicked hard problem. And this is not to say that the Golden Dome effort aspires to catch everything, but rather to have, as I said, a degree of protection for certain things against I would say, this full spectrum of threats.
When we talk about these systems, my impression is the cost can vary considerably depending on what you're trying to achieve. Can you talk us through what some of the estimates are, both for the near term, but also as we think of this as 5 years out, 10 years out, what this might end up costing?
Yeah, well, I think it is important to emphasize that every weapon system in DoD is limited, every one of them, and missile defense will be a limited, scarce asset as well. It's not going to be unlimited. I think that's something that somehow gets in the conversation in the water and needs to be disabused. The threat is very robust, and so I think that's the beginning of wisdom, is the recognition that you can't defend everything, especially in terms of non-ballistic maneuvering threats. You can't defend everything. You have to pick and choose in terms of what is your defended asset list. So that's sort of the beginning of wisdom, and so therefore it's hard to cost or throw out numbers because we don't yet know what the architecture is exactly. We don't yet know how many threats are going to be baked in terms of, okay, we're going to defend against 100 cruise missiles or 500 cruise missiles. So in other words, it's hard to cost what it is when we don't yet have an it and a scale for it. Now, don't worry, the CSIS Missile Defense Project will be costing the bejesus out of this once we get the architecture and some numbers. But what I would say is, based on various atmospherics and things, for instance, in Congress and otherwise, I would not be terribly surprised if you're looking at perhaps a $10 billion a year increase. And I tell you, we've put out various studies, including one on, for instance, Homeland cruise missile defense, and we built an architecture. We costed it conservatively, and it was a couple $2 billion a year of funding to be able to provide cruise and air missile defense for, I think it was 5 areas of the country. And so an extra $10 billion, I would say, is going to go fast, even if you are constrained and conservative in terms of what you're trying to defend and against how many things you're trying to defend. Again, the threat gets a vote. It has arrived in spades in terms of air and missile strike capability. You're also almost certainly going to see, because it was there in the executive order, more space sensors, which is critically important for tracking, especially hypersonic gliders and the like. And yes, you're probably going to see a significant research and development effort on the space-based interceptor front. We're recording on April 4th. There was a request for information, an RFI, that dropped today for an industry day on space-based interceptors specifically that will be held at the end of the month, April 30th. So that's coming. It's coming because it was directed in the executive order. Space-based interceptors is useful if you can do it to kill especially ballistic missiles in their boost phase, but it's hard. All of this missile defense is hard. As I like to say, we have demonstrated positively and definitively that you can't hit a bullet with a bullet. In fact, we can hit a bullet in a very specific place with another bullet. The precision guidance of hit to kill has come so far, and again, demonstrated in real life with every single missile defense system of ourselves and the Israelis has been used successfully in combat over the past 5 years, and actually just over the past 2 years. THAAD, Patriot, you name it, Aegis has been used successfully against especially Iranian missiles, for instance, and also Russian, of course, in Ukraine. So you're going to see some of the more of the same, but you're also going to see, I predict, a lot of new stuff.
So let's talk a little bit more about the threat. I at least was surprised in some ways by the effectiveness of missile defense against what Iran threw at Israel, and also impressed by what's been happening with Ukraine when at least when the systems have been in place. That said, China is a different adversary, and it has impressive capabilities. It has lots of systems, and it's going to get better. So could you describe how China might use hypersonics, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles in an all-out conflict, and what some of the problems would be for the United States in these circumstances?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And I'll tell you, Dan, I was also surprised. I say it was probably nothing short of a miracle that so very few of the 600 or so projectiles that were fired at Israel last April 14. Nothing short of a miracle that more didn't get through. And then again on October, I think it was October 1 of last year when they sent like 100 plus ballistic missiles alone. That's pretty stressing. But you're right. I like to say China on a bad day will be sending to Guam or to various other places, military bases, Okinawa, ports and airfields and CONUS. They're going to be sending an order of magnitude more than that. And so that's why, again, recognizing that you can't do everything, you can't defend everything. That's why I think the protection of military forces is going to be so important. The Golden Dome effort is apparently more on the counter value protection, but it is also said to be a capabilities-based approach, which means you develop the capabilities and then you can adjust your defended asset list, your DAO. You can adjust that as needed. And so, yes, the Chinese would throw a lot in terms of numbers, but significantly, just as on April 14 of last year, it was a complex and structured and integrated attack, which is to say complex in the sense of having multiple different types of things, and structured or integrated so that they arrive simultaneously or in some other way that stresses the radars, it stresses the defender in various ways. And so you can bet that China would structure an attack on, let's just say, Guam to be as difficult as possible. Now, the other thing is to recognize is, when people talk about the cost exchange ratio and they talk about real costs, they also talk about inventory or magazine depth. It's also really important to recognize that, as I said at the outset, it is limited. And the purpose of missile defense is not to sit and play catch. It's not simply to defend. It is rather to defend long enough to answer or end the threat by other means. And that's why as we do these cost exchange ratios, offense versus defense, it's a very stilted and partial approach to it. Just as we think about air power and land power within the broader joint force as part of a larger thing, you have to do the same here as well. And so air and missile defense, its job is to defend long enough to bring your diplomatic, military, economic, various other tools in the broad national toolbox to bear. And especially, let's just say that back to the Guam example, you may defend long enough to get your bombers off the ground or long enough to get your ships out of port. You're not going to be able to protect those airfields indefinitely, but you may be able to do it long enough so that China has an increased doubt that they aren't going to pay a very heavy price for doing that sort of an attack. And so it's the offense-defense integration, or it's the combination within the broader force, that's how you got to approach it. And that is how it contributes to deterrence, but also to our broad defense goals.
So you've talked us through the capability question. You've talked us through the cost exchange ratio question. Let me give you a third, I'll say, common criticism that I've heard. And this, frankly, goes back to, listeners can guess my age by this type of question. But if you go back to the kind of late Cold War period, there was a criticism of the U.S. nuclear buildup or other methods that at times, things like the Strategic Defense Initiative, saying basically in response, the Soviets will simply increase their arsenals. And in the end, we'll have both spent a lot of money, and the situation will not be any safer for the United States. And in fact, it'll probably be less stabilized. Is that a fair criticism here, where all we're doing is really incentivizing China to get a lot bigger arsenal?
Well, I think China's doing a really good job of building up their missile forces and their destroyers and all this other stuff already. Look, strategic stability is a thing. It can be defined in many different ways. I think it's important that we not have simply the carryover, the intellectual baggage of the past, and we approach the situation today as it presents itself, not kind of with the recollections of what we thought about the Soviets from years gone by. And so what I would say is, I've been doing this a while as well, that the conversation on missile defense, I would say, has changed, and changed dramatically in the past 3 years. And I think the Ukraine conflict has emphatically altered the perceptions of missile defense. And it's done so in a couple ways. One, it wasn't so very long ago when people would say, it's just impossible. Russian missiles are just too good. It's going to be impossible for us to be able to intercept these. And what we've seen with Patriots and NASAMS and other systems in the Ukraine conflict is actually they're shooting down Russian kit. And they're doing not a bad job of it. Do we have enough interceptors? Of course not. Again, to sit there indefinitely, that's why in the Ukraine case, they need to win the war by other means while air defense buys them time and protects their sovereignty in the near term. The other thing that has changed dramatically in the past 3 years is, I used to debate folks in Europe and here in the U.S. On, is missile defense provocative and destabilizing? I haven't heard any of that hardly at all in the past 3 years because, again, it has proven to be a stabilizing force. Now, I think it's critical to distinguish here between the big nuclear thing and the especially non-nuclear strategic attack, which is really what we've seen over the past couple of years. It is the abundance, it is the supply of lots and lots of precision guide capability, more and more missiles and more sophisticated missiles that has lowered the threshold for use and has, again, made these weapons of choice. And so what we've seen is that active air and missile defense contributes to stability, providing what I call speed bumps in the sky that was slowing down what might otherwise be a fait accompli kind of a thing. And so that I think is a nuance, and I think a really important one in terms of how we think about this. Nevertheless, there is this idea, this worry, let's just say, that if the United States had its Death Star and was capable of taking out every Chinese or Russian ICBM, that would be destabilizing because that would lead the Russians and the Chinese to worry that we would strike first and be able to sop up anything that they put up in return. Putting aside the fact that the United States is not going to do that, and I think they know that, putting that aside, first of all, I think you have to be even more of a faith-based believer in missile defense than I am to have that much confidence in it or to play that kind of a game of risk, just assuming that missile defense will be perfect. Again, back to April 14, I think it was a miracle that it caught as many as it did. This is not something you would be sanguine about or take lightly. So I think that you've seen the Russian kind of proliferation of cruise and hypersonic and, yes, undersea, megaton delivery devices. It's going to be wicked hard to get everything. And that's why I think it is far more stabilizing than destabilizing when you put pen to paper and you think it through. And so it's the threat is really, really hard, and you shouldn't take it lightly that we could take care of everything that our adversaries could throw at us at a stroke.
Let me just ask a specific question on China. Would China develop something similar? And does it have the technical capability? Is it something that China is talking about right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. In fact, the Chinese are. Go take a look at the latest report on the military power of the People's Republic of China from late last year, and you'll see a description there of the several families of air and missile defense systems that they're pursuing, to include mid-course ballistic missile defense. Of course, the Russians have had various forms of missile defense for some time, and they talk about in that PRC Mil Power report of their kind of S-300 and S-400. Those are Russian systems, classes of capability, and then there's the Chinese HQ versions of those. But they also talk about not just ASAP, but explicitly mid-course ballistic missile defense tests and capability development. So I think it is important to demystify and de-exotify this capability. It's something that is in high demand for ourselves, for Russia and China, for our allies and partners. You're seeing a massive demand signal in Europe with the Germany-led European Sky Shield Initiative. Everybody wants air defense. Everybody wants missile defense because that's where the threat is. It's not a boutique thing. It's a central thing to how folks fight wars now. And you saw in the Turkey acquisition of the Russian S-400 missile defense, air missile defense system, kind of a perfect storm. One of our NATO allies going and buying the Russian kit. We canceled their involvement in F-35 for good reasons as a result of that, because we didn't want them flying their F-35 in front of the Russian radars, and the Russian radars figuring out how to get the F-35, for instance. So it's a massive surge, as I like to say, in the supply of various long-range strike missile threats, but it's also a surge in the supply and demand globally of active air and missile defenses to contend with them that you're seeing among ourselves, our adversaries, and our allies.
Let me switch gears, given that this is Lawfare, and ask you to kind of take us through some of the legal implications. What types of international agreements or legal restrictions might be implicated by some of the Golden Dome systems?
Yeah. So again, we don't know yet what the Golden Dome is per se, but the good news is on this front that the answer is probably very, very few, if any. There's sometimes the idea that the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, for instance, would preclude space-based interceptors. Well, no, it doesn't. What it precludes is putting nuclear weapons in space. If the Russians go ahead with putting some kind of a nuclear device in low Earth orbit, that would be a violation. But these sort of things, hit to kill or various non-nuclear intercept means would not be an issue per se. Now, I'll tell you, I've as somebody who I did my dissertation on treaty law and executive agreements. There's a very rich and extensive legal history of the ABM Treaty, for instance. The ABM Treaty was signed on the same day as the SALT I Agreement in 1972. One was an Article II treaty. One was a congressional executive agreement. And there's been a lot of different forms and species in terms of U.S. con law and international law over the years. The ABM Treaty, of course, went away after kind of some treaty law questions after the Soviet Union went away in the summer of 2002 formally. And so with the exception of one provision of the New START Treaty that precludes the conversion of ICBM silos into essentially ground-based interceptor silos, with that one provision, there should not be any restrictions in terms of this capability development. And oh, by the way, the New START Treaty is going to go away in February of next year, and it's not going to come back. I predict we may be in a bit of the wilderness for a while in terms of nuclear arms control, and that's probably okay because we don't trust the Russians anyway, and just having a piece of paper isn't any real solace anyway. The Chinese, in a similar way, have made it pretty clear that they don't want to do any of that nuclear arms control agreements anytime soon. So I say that because once New START goes away, we will, in principle, be able to, if we should so desire, convert, let's just say, some old peacekeeper silos at Vandenberg to next-generation interceptor silos, if we should desire. That ought to be a bit of a goad, I suppose, but probably a small one in terms of the Russians and the Chinese.
So, Tom, let's pretend it's 2035, and we're looking at the Golden Dome, and if it's a success, what would you say it looks like? And the same question, if it's a failure, what do you think probably went wrong?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's going to be important to move fast. And so there does need to be substantial funding in PB26. But I would say I would go further, and I would say waiting until 2026 funding is too late. That the reconciliation bill that's percolating through Congress really, if it doesn't include sort of a head start on this, that will have been a massive missed opportunity. Another couple, I would say, very essential ingredients is less exotic but absolutely important considerations like acquisition authorities. Making it very clear who's in charge and giving them the access, the budget control, and the ability to make technical trades between these different systems and be able to put these different systems together into a coherent whole. I say that because that's kind of something that's being worked out right now in the Pentagon, and any day now, or perhaps already has happened, that will be sent up to the president, kind of a plan in terms of what they're going to build and kind of the plan for how to implement it. Amateurs do cost exchange ratios and strategy, and professionals do logistics and acquisition authorities. And that's going to be true here as with lots of other things as well. In terms of going sideways, look, there's lots of ways that we can get distracted. If we spin our wheels and kind of don't do the things that I emphasized earlier in terms of moving out smartly by folks that know what they're doing and being attentive to that. I have questions about clarity on what we're trying to defend. I think, again, it's the defense of population is important, infrastructure, but also I think it's going to be important to be attentive to the protection of military forces. And the reason I say that is because the thing that can tempt an adversary to attack is thinking that they can get away with it. And my metaphor here is people talk about a cyber Pearl Harbor and a space Pearl Harbor. I worry about a Pearl Harbor, which is to say missile attack, aerial attack on, let's just say, forward-based military forces, in the hopes that the U.S. Joint Force can be penned up and impeded long enough for them to go on about their business with some kind of regional aggression. And so the protection of military forces, I think, is something that's going to be super important here to actually contributing to, no kidding, deterrence of shenanigans and aggression by the bad guys. It is, to be clear, going to be absolutely critical that we reorient our focus to the bigs, to Russia and China. And I'll say that notwithstanding the fact that the last two national defense strategies have said, hey, it's all about great power competition or China's the pacing threat or what have you, our missile defense efforts haven't quite been in alignment with that. We've still been pretty focused. As the January executive order correctly noted, we've still been fairly focused on the rogues, North Korea and Iran, in terms of our, especially ballistic missile defense efforts. So that needs to change, just so that we're in alignment with the really big priorities of the country, of the Department of Defense.
Tom, those seem like fitting words to end our podcast on. Thank you very much for guiding us today.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks to Lawfare. Great show.
The Lawfare podcast is produced in cooperation with the Brookings Institution. You can get ad-free versions of this and other Lawfare podcasts by becoming a Lawfare material supporter at our website, lawfaremedia.org/support. You'll also get access to special events and other content available only to our supporters. Please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Look out for other podcasts, including Rational Security, Allies, The Aftermath, and Escalation, our latest Lawfare Presents podcast series about the war in Ukraine. Check out our written work as well at lawfaremedia.org. The podcast is edited by Jen Pacha, and our audio engineer this episode was Kara Schillen of Goat Rodeo. Our theme song is from Alibi Music. As always, thank you for listening.